The twinkling city ride. The city lights flickered against the car windows as Mr. Henderson, a man whose silver hair matched the calm rhythm of his driving, glanced in the rearview mirror. Sarah, a passenger he'd picked up a few blocks back, was humming softly, her eyes wide with a youthful wonder he found both endearing and a touch bewildering. He'd driven this route countless times, the familiar grid of streets and buildings a blurred backdrop to his thoughts. Tonight, however, felt different. He was on autopilot, his hands steady on the wheel, the worn leather a familiar comfort. The meter ticked on, a quiet count of time and distance. He'd expected her to announce her stop, or at least give a nod of readiness, but she remained reclined, her gaze fixed on the kaleidoscope of neon signs and street lamps painting streaks across the glass. Mr. Henderson, usually reserved to the point of silence with his fares, felt a subtle curiosity prickle him. It wasn't often someone lingered in his cab with such unadulterated pleasure. "Enjoying the view?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. He surprised himself with the question. Usually, he stuck to pleasantries about the weather or destination. Sarah straightened, a bright smile blossoming on her face. "It's amazing, isn't it? Like a million tiny stars trying to outshine each other. I never really noticed before." Her voice carried a lightness that was almost infectious. "I usually just scroll on my phone, but tonight I decided to actually look." Mr. Henderson nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. He often noticed the lights, the way they transformed the mundane into something magical after dark, but he rarely voiced it. He'd learned long ago that most people were too busy with their own concerns to appreciate such simple beauty. "Where are you headed, dear?" he prompted gently, the street he was on nearing the general area she'd initially given. He knew his routes like the back of his hand, every shortcut and every potential traffic snarl. He was a creature of habit, and deviation, even a slight one, felt unusual. Sarah leaned forward, her elbows resting on her knees, her eyes still sparkling. "Don't end the ride yet," she said softly, a playful glint in her eyes. "I like where this is going." Her words, light as they were, held an unexpected charge. The small space of the cab suddenly felt filled with an unarticulated energy. Mr. Henderson's hand, poised near the meter to press the stop button, hesitated. The rhythmic tick of the fare seemed to amplify in the sudden, quiet intimacy. He glanced at her again in the mirror. There was no mistaking the warmth in her gaze, the hint of something more than just appreciation for the city lights. He felt a faint blush creep up his neck, an unfamiliar sensation. He cleared his throat, the sound a little huskier than usual. "But, your stop was just ahead." "I know," she replied, her grin widening. "But I think I want to see where else these stars take us. Just a little further." Her youthful optimism was a palpable force, challenging his ingrained routine, his quiet predictability. The thought of extending the drive, of venturing beyond his established route, usually would have brought a wave of mild anxiety. But looking at her, at the genuine, open curiosity in her eyes, he felt a flicker of something else, a forgotten sense of adventure, perhaps. The city, usually just a network of roads and destinations, suddenly seemed to offer more, to promise an unexplored possibility. The flirty tension in the small cab was undeniable, a new kind of light shimmering amidst the familiar glow of the city. A ride that doesn't end. The city lights flickered against the car windows as Arthur, 61 years old, glanced at Sarah in the rearview mirror. She had just turned 18, and instead of gathering her bag to disembark at her usual corner, she leaned forward, her bright eyes glinting in the passing street lights. A subtle, almost mischievous grin played on her lips, a stark contrast to the usual weariness of late-night passengers. "Don't end the ride yet, Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice a soft, unexpected plea that cut through the low hum of the engine. "Please. I like where this is going." Arthur's hand, calloused from years of gripping a steering wheel, hovered over the meter. The click of it disengaging was a familiar, almost automatic movement, ingrained over decades of driving this very route. But her words, light as they were, snagged something deep within him. A small, unfamiliar flutter started in his chest, a sensation he hadn't felt in, well, he couldn't quite remember when. It wasn't a romantic flutter, not exactly, but something akin to the surprise of finding a forgotten $20 bill in an old coat pocket. He met her gaze in the mirror. Her grin widened slightly, not teasing, but genuinely earnest. The faint glow from the dashboard highlighted the youthful curve of her cheek, the adventurous glint in her eyes. It was a look that seemed to challenge the very concept of routine, of predictable stops and predestined destinations. A warmth spread through Arthur's cheeks, a blush he hadn't experienced since his own youth. It felt silly, almost adolescent, but it was there, undeniable. His fingers, instead of pushing the meter button, tightened slightly on the worn leather of the steering wheel. The rhythmic blinker, indicating her stop was just ahead, seemed to mock his hesitation. He could almost hear the impatient honk of the car behind him if he lingered too long. He swallowed, the dryness in his throat a sudden presence. "Sarah," he began, his voice a little rougher than intended. "This is your stop." "The usual." "I know," she replied, her voice unwavering. "That's why I'm asking." "Just, keep driving." "Anywhere." "I don't care." She gestured vaguely with one hand, encompassing the dark, sprawling city beyond the windows. "Just, not here." "Not yet." The simplicity of her request, coupled with the profound conviction in her gaze, was disarming. It wasn't a demand, but an invitation. An invitation to step off the well-trodden path, to deviate from the script. He could feel the pulse in his wrist quicken. The rational part of his mind, the one that valued punctuality and proper procedure, screamed at him to stop. But another part, a more dormant, adventurous part, stirred. He looked at her again in the mirror, her eyes wide, expectant. The city lights ahead blurred into a stream of possibility. Without another word, Arthur flicked off the turn signal. He pressed the accelerator, the engine responding with a low growl. The cab glided smoothly past the familiar street corner, past the brightly lit bus stop where Sarah usually waited. He didn't look back to see if anyone else had noticed. He just kept driving, the unexpected journey unfolding with every turn of the wheels. The flutter in his chest settled into a steady, pleasant hum. Dreams of far-off places. The city lights blurred into streaks of amber and violet outside the cab windows as Mr. Henderson's hand, still hovering over the meter, slowly lowered. Sarah, a mischievous glint in her eyes, had leaned forward, her voice a soft conspirator. "Don't end the ride yet," she'd said, a smile playing on her lips. "I like where this is going." The unspoken tension in the small space, thick and shimmering, seemed to hum with possibility. He cleared his throat, the sound a gentle rumble. Where would you like to go, then, Miss Jenkins?" he asked, his gaze flickering to the rearview mirror, meeting hers for a fleeting moment. He felt a curious loosening in his chest, a sensation akin to an old, tightly wound spring finally giving way. Sarah settled back against the worn upholstery, a thoughtful expression replacing her playful one. "Anywhere, really." "Everywhere, actually." She paused, a genuine enthusiasm starting to bubble up, unable to be contained. "You know, sometimes, when I'm just walking around the city, or even when I'm supposed to be studying, my mind just drifts to all these places I haven't seen yet." Her voice grew softer, imbued with a quiet yearning. "I dream of mountains, Mr. Henderson. Not just hills, but real, towering peaks, so high they scrape the clouds. The kind you have to crane your neck to see the top of, with snow caps even in summer." She gestured vaguely with one hand, as if sketching the colossal forms in the air. Mr. Henderson listened, his knuckles resting lightly on the steering wheel. He'd driven countless fairs, heard snippets of countless lives, but there was a raw, unvarnished sincerity in Sarah's voice that held him captive. His usual reserved demeanor began to recede, replaced by a quiet attentiveness. He'd always been a man of habit, of predictable routes and familiar landscapes. The idea of mountains so grand they touched the sky felt as alien as a different planet, yet her description painted a vivid picture in his mind. "And the oceans," Sarah continued, her voice gaining a new timbre, a deeper resonance. "Not just the shore, but standing right at the edge of something so vast, so endless, that you can't see the other side. feeling the sheer power of the waves crashing, the salt spray on your face. Imagine the colors, Mr. Henderson. Not just blue, but every shade from deep sapphire to shimmering turquoise, shifting with the light. And the smell, that clean, briny scent that just speaks of adventure and mystery. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if conjuring the scene, a soft smile gracing her lips. He watched her in the mirror, fascinated. Her youthful exuberance was a stark contrast to his own quiet existence, yet it wasn't jarring. Instead, it felt like a warm current, subtly thawing something he hadn't realized was frozen within him. He found himself imagining the crisp mountain air, the roar of the ocean, sensory details he'd only ever experienced through documentaries or faded photographs. He cleared his throat again, a half-formed question on his tongue. Those are big dreams, Miss Jenkins, he said, the words coming out slower than he'd intended, tinged with a genuine admiration. He hadn't meant it as a challenge, but rather an acknowledgement of the sheer scale of her ambition. Sarah's eyes fluttered open, meeting his in the mirror. They are, she agreed, her smile widening. But aren't those the best kind? Her gaze held his, a silent invitation to share in her boundless vision. The meter on his dashboard remained still, a small, glowing testament to a moment suspended in time, far from the hurried demands of city streets. A sailor's tales. So, you like where this is going, eh? Mr. Henderson's voice was a low rumble, a sound that always felt as if it had been weathered by something more than just time. He turned fully in his seat, the subtle scent of pipe tobacco and old leather reaching her. The city lights, now just a blur beyond the taxi's rear window, seemed to dim in comparison to the sudden brightness in his eyes. Sarah leaned back, a comfortable smile playing on her lips. I do. It's intriguing. You've got stories, Mr. Henderson. I can tell. He chuckled, a dry, warm sound. Stories, yes. Though perhaps not the kind you're imagining. He paused, looking out at the passing streetlights as if watching old memories flicker past. Before this, he gestured vaguely around the cab. I saw a fair bit of the world. Used to be a sailor, you see. Sarah's eyes widened, a genuine spark of surprise replacing her playful amusement. A sailor? No way. What kind of ship? Cargo mostly. Tramp steamers, we called them. From the time I was barely 18 myself, until a man gets tired of the rocking and the rolling, and the endless horizon. His gaze drifted to some unseen point in the distance, a slight wistfulness in his expression. It was a life. A hard one, sometimes lonely, but never dull. He began to speak, his voice gaining a quiet confidence, painting vivid pictures with simple words. I've seen the sun rise over the Golden Horn in Istanbul, the minarets catching the first light like polished spears. Felt the biting wind off the North Sea, turning your breath to ice. Heard the rhythm of steel drums in a Kingston street, the air thick with the smell of spices and the sound of laughter. Sarah listened, captivated. Her own world, largely confined to the familiar streets of her city and the digital expanse of her phone, suddenly felt impossibly small. He spoke of the bustling markets of Marrakesh, the vibrant dyes of the fabrics a riot against the ochre walls, the calls of the vendors a chaotic symphony. He described the tranquil, almost mystical stillness of a Japanese garden, where every stone and every ripple in the pond seemed placed with purpose. He spoke of the towering, emerald-green peaks of Hawaii, their sheer majesty taking your breath away, and the way the Pacific Ocean truly lived up to its name, a vast, calming presence. Every port had its own smell, its own sound, he mused, a faint smile on his lips. The salty tang of the sea was a constant, of course, but then you'd catch the scent of jasmine in a Mediterranean harbor, or the sharp, metallic tang of an industrial port in the Great Lakes. The world's a much bigger place than you think, Sarah, when you're standing on the deck of a ship, watching the land recede. He fell silent for a moment, the hum of the taxi the only sound. Sarah didn't press him, content to let his words echo in the space between them. The reserved man she'd initially seen, the one who navigated the city streets with quiet efficiency, had just revealed a hidden depth, a past rich with adventure and distant shores. The city lights outside seemed to shimmer with a new kind of magic, reflecting the distant lands he had brought to life. The melody of connection. The city lights, now softened to a distant glow, retreated as the cab veered onto a less populated road. Mr. Henderson, his hand still resting lightly on the meter, felt a warmth spread through him. It wasn't just the lingering blush from Sarah's playful dare, it was the quiet hum of something new. He cleared his throat, a small, uncharacteristic sound. "Well, if we're going somewhere, where exactly is that?" Sarah leaned back against the plush seat, a thoughtful expression replacing her earlier impish grin. "Anywhere the music takes us, I suppose." Her gaze drifted to the dashboard, then back to him. Do you ever listen to music while you drive?" He nodded slowly. "Sometimes. Usually the news, or, well, the usual stations." He gestured vaguely towards the radio. It was currently off, a silent black rectangle in the dim light. "What's your usual?" she pressed, a genuine curiosity in her voice. "Like, if you could pick anything right now, what would it be?" Mr. Henderson considered this. His usual was a rotation of talk radio and the occasional classic rock station, nothing he truly felt passionate about. But Sarah's question invited something deeper, something he hadn't thought about in years. A faint, almost forgotten melody drifted into his mind. "There used are some old songs," he began, a rare smile touching his lips. From before your time. Soft, sweet things. Melodies that tell a story without needing words." Sarah's eyes lit up. "Oh, I love old songs. My grandmother used to play them. Bing Crosby, Ella Fitzgerald, Nat King Cole, the kind that make you want to sway slow with someone." She hummed a few bars, a soft, tuneless melody that somehow still conveyed the feeling. "Those are the best. They have so much soul." A spark, unexpected and bright, ignited within Mr. Henderson. He hadn't encountered anyone in years, let alone someone so young, who appreciated those forgotten tunes. It felt like finding a lost piece of himself. Without a word, he reached for the radio dial. His fingers, usually precise and economical, moved with a newfound tenderness. He bypassed his usual presets, ignoring the familiar static and booming voices. He rotated the knob slowly, past the pop anthems and the relentless bass lines, searching. A faint, reedy saxophone began to filter through the speakers, followed by a gentle, rolling piano. Then, a voice, smooth as aged whiskey, filled the quiet space of the cab. It was Frank Sinatra, singing about autumn leaves. The song, a timeless lament, settled around them like a comforting blanket. Sarah let out a soft sigh of contentment. "Yes," she whispered, leaning her head back against the seat, her eyes closed. "This is perfect." Mr. Henderson glanced at her in the rearview mirror. The soft glow of the dashboard lights illuminated her face, serene and utterly captivated. He felt a profound sense of ease. The tension that had coiled in his shoulders for years seemed to unravel, dissolving into the rich, warm notes that now enveloped them. The city lights outside blurred into streaks of color, no longer a backdrop for a rigid schedule, but a shimmering tapestry accompanying their unexpected journey. The cab, usually a vessel of hurried transactions, transformed into a sanctuary of shared memory and nascent connection. The melody, sweet and clear, wove itself around them, binding their disparate lives with threads of unexpected harmony. Moonlight in the park. The city lights, which had until now been a blur of distant promise and fleeting reflections, began to thin, giving way to darker stretches of roadside. Mr. Henderson, his hand still resting on the meter he hadn't engaged since she spoke, noted the looming expanse of green on their left. It was Sterling Park, a sprawling urban oasis he'd driven past countless times but rarely entered. Its ancient oaks formed a dense, irregular silhouette against the bruised purple of the twilight sky. "Oh, Mr. Henderson." Sarah's voice, a sudden, bright counterpoint to the quiet hum of the engine, pulled him from his thoughts. Her finger pointed beyond the windshield. "The moon. It's incredible. Can we stop for just a minute? I want to see it properly." He hesitated. Stopping wasn't part of the routine. His internal clock, accustomed to its predictable rhythm, twitched. Yet, the question was delivered with such unadulterated enthusiasm, a genuine awe that felt almost infectious. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Her face was tilted upwards, illuminated by the faint glow of the dashboard, her eyes wide with a childlike wonder. A faint smile touched his lips. Just for a moment, he agreed, surprising himself with the ease of his acquiescence. He signaled, easing the cab onto a quiet side street bordering the park, pulling up beside an old, wrought iron fence. The air that greeted them as they stepped out was cooler, fresher than the city's usual breath, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and late-blooming jasmine. Above them, the moon hung, a luminous disk of burnished silver, casting long, ethereal shadows across the manicured lawns. It was almost full, its surface a tapestry of craters and ancient seas, visible even to the naked eye. "Wow," Sarah breathed, her voice hushed with reverence. She started walking, not towards the well-lit paths, but towards a less trodden area where the trees clustered more thickly, their branches laced together like skeletal fingers. Mr. Henderson followed, the gravel crunching softly under his sensible shoes. The distant thrum of city life seemed to recede, replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves and the occasional chirp of a night creature. Sarah stopped beneath a particularly sprawling oak, its gnarled limbs reaching out as if to embrace the sky. She tilted her head back, her gaze fixed on the celestial expanse. "Look, Mr. Henderson," she whispered, her arm lifting, finger extended. "See that tiny one, just to the left of the moon? The really bright one?" He squinted, adjusting his focus. Indeed, a solitary star, impossibly brilliant, pulsed steadily beside the moon, a miniature jewel against the velvet black. "I see it," he confirmed, his voice softer than usual. "I'm going to make a wish," she declared, her eyes closing briefly. A small, contented smile played on her lips. "There." She opened her eyes, sparkling with an unspoken joy. He stood beside her, feeling the cool night air on his face, the vastness of the sky above, and the quiet presence of this young woman beside him. He wasn't thinking about the meter, or his schedule, or the late hour. He was simply there. Looking at that moon, that distant star, and at Sarah's radiant face, Mr. Arthur Henderson felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years, a profound and simple happiness that resonated deep within his soul. It was a feeling entirely new, yet undeniably right. A happy flutter. City lights danced across the car windows as Arthur caught Sarah's gaze in the rearview mirror. Freshly 18, she leaned forward from the back seat, a mischievous grin on her face. "Don't end the ride yet," she murmured. "I like where this is going." His hand paused above the meter, the burgeoning flirtation in the small space suddenly undeniable. A quiet smile, a sensation almost forgotten, bloomed in his chest. This wasn't the boisterous joy of youth or the placid contentment of age. It was a delicate, playful tremor, like a trapped bird finding an open window. He couldn't pinpoint the last time he'd felt anything akin to it. Years, certainly. Decades, perhaps. Life had settled into a comfortable, predictable rhythm, a steady hum rarely punctuated by such unexpected grace notes. "Where exactly is this going, then, Miss Jenkins?" he asked, a corner of his mouth twitching upwards. Sarah's eyes sparkled. "Anywhere interesting. Somewhere you haven't been in a while." "Surprise me, Mr. Henderson." He considered her words. His usual routes were ingrained, a tapestry of efficient familiarity. Yet, her uninhibited enthusiasm was infectious. Instead of turning right, he veered left, navigating a tree-lined street he hadn't seen in ages, past stately homes glowing softly behind curtained windows. A surprising lightness, a buoyant feeling, replaced the steering wheel's usual utilitarian weight, transforming it into the helm of a small, hopeful craft. "There's a small park, just a few blocks from here," he mused aloud, the thought escaping before fully formed. Barely a park, really. More of a green space with a few benches. But the old oak, it's magnificent. Sarah leaned back, a soft sigh of contentment escaping her lips. "Sounds perfect." They pulled to the curb moments later, the faint scent of damp earth and late-blooming jasmine drifting through the open window. Streetlights cast the ancient oak's long, dancing shadows onto the dew-kissed grass. They sat for a long moment, simply breathing in the quiet night, its gentle hush a stark contrast to the city's typical clamor. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "This is nice." Arthur nodded, a warmth spreading through him. It was more than nice, it was an unexpected revelation. He realized how long it had been since he'd experienced such a simple, shared moment of profound peace. Not a grand gesture or a life-altering event, but a subtle shift in perspective, a quiet acknowledgement of connection. A single raindrop splattered on the windshield, then another. The faint pitter-patter began to intensify, a gentle drumbeat against the cab's roof. "Looks like our park visit is being cut short," Arthur said, a hint of regret in his voice, though the gentle stirring in his chest remained. Sarah giggled. "A perfect excuse for another ride, then, wouldn't you say?" As he shifted into gear, the rain began to fall in earnest, washing the city clean, leaving behind a fresh, hopeful scent. The world outside blurred into shimmering lights, but within the cab, a new clarity had begun to emerge. "The best ride ever." Mr. Henderson, Sarah's voice, a bright chime above the drumming rain, cut through the quiet hum of the car. She leaned forward, her face alight, framed by the soft glow of passing streetlights. That was the best ride ever." Arthur's fingers, steady on the steering wheel, tightened almost imperceptibly. He felt a peculiar pang, a mix of warmth and an unexpected wistfulness. The ride, indeed, was almost over. He had navigated countless streets, ferried innumerable passengers, but this journey, with its surprising turns and the unexpected intimacy that had bloomed in the confined space of his cab, felt different. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror, her eyes sparkling with an unbridled joy that was contagious. He cleared his throat, a low rumble. "Glad you enjoyed it, Sarah." His voice, usually so measured, held a faint tremor he hoped she didn't notice. He watched the blur of city lights through the rain-streaked windshield. Each drop seemed to magnify and distort the colors, turning the harsh glare of neon into soft, shimmering washes. The rain, which had been a steady presence for hours, now seemed to lend a dreamlike quality to the urban landscape. Tall buildings, usually stark and imposing, appeared softened at their edges, their windows reflecting fragmented, watery scenes. Traffic signals bled into misty halos of red, amber, and green. It was a beautiful, melancholic tableau, and for the first time in a long time, Arthur felt a genuine reluctance for the journey to conclude. Sarah, oblivious to the quiet battle within him, sighed contentedly. "It's like the cities, shimmering. All blurry and beautiful. You know, normally I just watch the buildings go by, but tonight it feels like they're part of something else." She gestured vaguely at the passing scene. "Like a painting, but it's alive." Arthur nodded, a small, private smile touching his lips. He saw it too. The familiar, mundane routes he traversed daily had, under Sarah's fresh gaze, transformed. He saw the city not just as a collection of streets and structures, but as a living entity, breathing and pulsing under the veil of rain. The very air inside the cab felt charged, not just with the dampness from outside, but with Sarah's youthful energy, her simple appreciation for beauty. He felt a flicker of something new, a nascent curiosity about the world beyond his usual, predictable loops. As he slowed for her street, the soft glow of her porch light visible through the downpour, a quiet urgency settled over him. He wanted to hold on to this moment, this unexpected connection, just a little longer. But the rules of the road, the unspoken agreements of his profession, dictated otherwise. The meter was still running, but the ride was undeniably ending. He pulled up to the curb, the tires hissing against the wet asphalt. The engine idled, a quiet thrumming that suddenly felt too loud in the sudden silence. "Well," Sarah said, her voice dropping slightly, the earlier effervescence tinged with a hint of regret. She reached for the door handle. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson. Really. That was unforgettable." She looked at him directly, her gaze warm and sincere. "Good night." "Good night, Sarah," he replied, his voice a little gruffer than intended. He watched as she slipped out, a vibrant splash of color against the dark, rainy night, and disappeared under the awning of her home. The cab felt suddenly vast, empty, and strangely quiet. The city outside, though still beautiful in its blurred, rainy splendor, now seemed to have lost a little of its shimmer. Just the beginning. The city lights, once a blur of red and white, now seemed to pulse with a softer, almost inviting glow as the cab idled. Mr. Henderson's hand, which had been poised above the meter, slowly lowered. He turned slightly in his seat, the leather creaking a gentle protest. Sarah, still in the back, her grin infectious, had shifted forward, resting her chin on the back of his seat. "Are you sure, Sarah?" he asked, his voice a low rumble, laced with a hint of something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't reluctance, not exactly. More like a pleasant surprise, a ripple in the quiet pond of his well-ordered days. "Absolutely," she chirped, her eyes sparkling like the distant streetlights. "This is the best ride I've had all year. And honestly, I've got nowhere pressing to be." He chuckled, a sound that felt foreign and yet entirely welcome. The initial flirty tension, which had coiled in the small space, had dissipated, replaced by a comfortable, almost companionable hum. It wasn't the kind of flirtation he was used to, or indeed, had ever really experienced. This was lighter. More playful. It felt like a discovery. "All right then," he conceded, putting the car into gear. "Where to next, adventure seeker?" Sarah leaned back, a thoughtful expression replacing her earlier exuberance. "You know what, Mr. Henderson? How about we just drive? See where the city takes us. I've always wanted to just let go and see what happens." Mr. Henderson, a creature of habit and precise routes, felt a tremor of apprehension, quickly overshadowed by a strange sense of liberation. His life had been a series of planned stops and predictable turns. The idea of simply driving was alien, yet oddly compelling. The fear of new experiences, a silent companion for years, seemed to shrink, momentarily dwarfed by Sarah's unbridled curiosity. He took a random turn, then another, letting the city's labyrinthine streets dictate their path. They passed neon-lit diners, silent office buildings, and residential streets where porch lights glowed like sleepy eyes. Sarah pointed out anything that caught her eye, a particularly intricate piece of graffiti, a cat perched on a fence, a couple dancing to unheard music in a brightly lit apartment window. Mr. Henderson found himself seeing the city with fresh eyes, through her youthful, vibrant perspective. He listened, truly listened, to her observations, her quiet wonder, her occasional bursts of laughter. Hours later, the sky had begun to lighten, a faint blush appearing on the horizon. They found themselves on a quiet street overlooking the bay, the water a calm expanse reflecting the emerging dawn. Mr. Henderson pulled over. "I suppose this is it for tonight," he said, a touch of wistfulness in his tone. Sarah nodded, a soft smile playing on her lips. She unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the door, stepping out onto the sidewalk. The cool morning air carried the scent of salt and possibility. She turned back to the cab, her eyes meeting his. She waved, a simple, graceful arc of her hand, her smile widening into a radiant beam. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," she called out, her voice clear and bright in the stillness of the dawn. That was, truly something. He watched her, a strange, unprecedented warmth spreading through his chest. It wasn't merely the lingering flush of the night's unexpected adventure. It was something deeper, a feeling he hadn't felt in decades, perhaps ever. A lightness. A sense of genuine, unburdened happiness. Then, just before she turned to walk away, she called out again, her voice carrying on the gentle breeze. "See you soon, Mr. Henderson." She didn't wait for a reply, just offered one last, brilliant smile and began to walk. Mr. Henderson watched her until she was just a distant silhouette against the brightening sky, then a tiny speck, and finally, gone. He sat there for a long moment, the scent of the ocean mingling with the lingering faint aroma of Sarah's floral perfume in the cab. The quiet hum of the engine, the familiar solidity of the steering wheel beneath his hands, everything was the same, yet profoundly different. The world outside felt richer, more vibrant. The thought of his usual predictable routine no longer felt comforting, but almost limiting. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this ride, this unexpected detour into the early morning light, was just the beginning. The beginning of something special, something new. And for the first time in a very long time, Mr. Arthur Henderson was ready for it.